Hello everyone, Sarah from here. I just wanted to briefly go over the farming mechanics on the server as there are a couple of adjustments. We're using the Pwn Plants plugin, which does a couple of things. For one, it will reduce the growth rate of most plants depending on the biome that you are, as well as introduce a death rate. So the way that this works is essentially that in the absence of fertilizer, which is soul sand, uh, you will have reduced growth depending on the biome that you're in. In great growing, right now it's set to 80%, in good growing 65%, and bad growing 50%. Generally, the edges of biomes and the hills of biomes are bad places to grow, while the best places to grow are in the center of biomes, so in the middle of the forest biome as opposed to a forest hill. Now let's address the growth rate and death rate. How can you adjust the death rate? Well, I ran a little bit of an experiment, and here I have a gold block which has a radius of 10 in all directions, and we have no shrubs, no dead plants. Over here we have no gold block, and over here we have already one shrub, so that's that 5% rate. This is mostly to limit automation, so if you have an automatic farm, you have it running in the background, you're AFKing. Over time you do need to start replacing those crops if you do not have a gold block and a fertilizer block. Now what's this about fertilizer? So as I told you already, it grows at 50%, but in the presence of a fertilizer, which has a 5 block range in each direction, it will essentially restore the growth rate back to the vanilla growth rate. It will be 100% growth. The combination of these two blocks will allow you to grow, essentially return growth back to the vanilla rate, but there's also another aspect to consider, and that is darkness. So while you can indeed grow crops underground, which would qualify as darkness, if you have torches around you, so you have lighting, but even if it's still underground, it's considered darkness. So what do? You would simply use these UV blocks or glowstone blocks, and it will restore growth back to 100%. Alright, so now we're in the config file. I'm going to briefly go over the various biome categories and different crops. As I explained, we have the UV blocks. What is it? Weed killer, which is the gold block. It prevents them from dying. The weed killer radius is set to 10. Fertilizer is enabled. Its radius is 5. And it makes it so that plants will grow to 100%. Glowstone, which is a UV block, will allow plants to grow in an area where there's no natural light. So if you're underground and you're growing crops, you have an underground city or bunker, the slow growth associated from not being in natural light can be mitigated by using glowstone, and that has a radius of 5. So there are different categories of biomes. I'm not really going to go through all of this because it's not too important. But what is important is looking at the great growing and the good growing. So here it is. So these are the great growing biomes. In these biomes, you'll have 5% death rate, 85% growth rate. In good growing, you have 65% growth rate, 5% death rate. And as you can see, the hill areas in a particular biome are actually not good for growing crops compared to the floor of the biome, which you see here, the birch forest, the jungle. But when you get to the hills and at the edge, you tend to have a lower growth rate. Bad growing areas, obviously in the taiga, cold beaches, extreme hills, so generally cold places and very rocky areas like the Mesa Rock, Savannah Rock, and Stone Beach, which are not ideal for growing. And then you have the ocean category, which we'll go over a little bit later, and some of this is important. So bamboo is unique in that it will only grow in the jungle and the desert groups, so bamboo forest, jungle, desert will be a good place to grow bamboo. Beetroots, I'm trying to remember, so yeah, beetroots, carrots, and potatoes are only able to grow in great and good growing, otherwise they're not able to grow elsewhere. Cactus is a bit unique and it can only grow in the desert as well as the savanna, preferably the desert at 100 rate and then at savanna at 50. And chorus flowers can only grow in the end. Cocoa can only grow in the jungle. And melon and so melons and pumpkins, they can grow anywhere, but they have a default 50% growth rate. Netherwort will preferentially grow in the nether biome, so it will grow at 100% if it's in the nether, but if it's in the overworld, it's 50%. So maybe if you have a blaze farm, you might want to put your netherwort farm next to it. Save yourself a little bit of soul sand and gold, I guess. And sugarcane, this is going to be the most controversial, but sugarcane can only grow near beaches, rivers, deserts, swamp, and as well as warm ocean areas. So you may want to be very thoughtful about where you put your nation, because there are three main crops that are incredibly important for the progression of the server: wheat, sugarcane, and pumpkins, because they are needed in large quantities for repair kits. So just sort of be cognizant of that.